You're about to learn the 4 ways that you can be an amazing communicator. If you just learn to not make these 4 mistakes, I guarantee you, you will stand out, you will be respected, and the moment you open your mouth, people will say, wow, they know how to communicate. We want to give them more opportunities. So I'm going to show you what not to do and then what to do instead. It's just a very simple way of understanding it. The first thing I want you to understand is the concept of verbal efficiency. I had someone, I used to go to a gym, and there was this person at the gym who would just talk to everybody all the time. This super extroverted person, right? And when I go to the gym, I just keep to myself. I don't talk to anyone. He came to me, he said, hey, how's it going? Good to see you here. And I thought, wow, what a confident individual. And he would bounce around like a pinball machine talking to everyone at the gym. Now, every single time I would come back to the gym, he would find a way to start a conversation with me in the middle of my set. So if I'm doing my biceps, if I'm doing my bench press, he would just start talking to me, and he wasn't really going anywhere with it. And he kept talking and talking. And eventually I realized in a couple of weeks, I would see him in the gym, and if it's leg day, all of a sudden it's chest day. Or if he's in the weight room, I would go do cardio. If he's in the cardio room, I would go do weights. I would just try to avoid him to the point where I eventually canceled my gym membership because I just couldn't stand the person. Because he would just talk and talk and talk and talk, and I associated his presence with being annoyed. So here's what I mean. The concept of verbal efficiency is when you open your mouth, how impactful are your words? Do you talk a lot and there's very little value in your words? Do you have to say a lot to get to the point? Now, one of the challenges people have with this is, let's say they are expressing a thought, right? I asked you, hey, James, tell me what you think. And James says, oh yeah, there's a lot of things we can do. There's this that comes to mind and that comes to mind. And last week I was saying this, and I think it's a pretty good idea and we should try that. But we don't quite know what James has said. What is the point of what you are trying to communicate? So in other words, they're inefficient with their words. They don't have verbal efficiency. They say a lot of things, but it doesn't have an impact. Now, I'm sure you know someone in your life who maybe doesn't speak a lot, but when they open their mouth, everyone listens because they have verbal efficiency. When they open their mouth, every single word has meaning. So if I asked you, hey, what did you have for lunch today? And you said, well, you know what, I was so hungry and I was thinking of getting a salad, but I didn't end up getting a salad. Instead, I thought, you know what, I need some more protein. So I looked at the chicken options there. I had a restaurant downstairs. They were opening up. I wanted to check those out. So eventually, you know what, I ended up getting a sandwich. Or you could have said, I had a sandwich for lunch. Can you see the difference here? So can you control the words out of your mouth? Can you think about what you want to say? And that's the other thing. Most people don't think before they speak. They just talk for the sake of talking. And you'll see this in interviews a lot when people are nervous. Tell me about yourself. Oh, yeah. So, I grew up here and then I started. They don't think about their answer. So if you want to be efficient, you have to learn to structure your thoughts. I've got another video on that. But organize before you verbalize, meaning organize the thoughts in your head before you say them out loud. Make sure you understand what you're saying, because if you don't understand it, no one else will. So the concept of verbal efficiency is make every single word count. Now let's get to the second concept here, called the concept of frequency. The best way I can describe this to you is I was watching a TED Talk yesterday on quantum computing, and the title was something like, quantum computing is way cooler than you think, or it's way better than you think. And the person was going to explain how quantum computers work. As I was watching it, he was giving different examples, different pie charts, different illustrations. I couldn't really understand what the heck he was talking about. And then I went to the comment section, and no one else had any idea what he was talking about either. So what happened was he was operating on a different frequency. So when you are talking here, right, and you assume there's all of this information that you know, your audience might be in a completely different plane. They might have this frequency. So if you assume that everyone has your level of understanding, then the information will go right over their head. And I'm sure if you've ever attended a math class or you've ever been in school, you sat through a presentation at work, they're talking at these high level points and you just don't know what's going on. So what good speakers do is they're able to identify the frequency of their audience, how much of an understanding the audience has, and then catering the words and the message around it. So let's say you are someone who likes to use Photoshop. You like editing pictures, right? And you were explaining how to use Photoshop to people who are just getting into design school. You're going to explain it to them in certain words. You're going to explain it to them using certain metaphors and analogies. Now think you're explaining it to someone who has no interest in design. Now think about how you would explain it to a 5-year-old who loves drawing. Could you see how the way the words that you choose will change depending on the frequency of the audience? And this is why fundamentally one of the biggest mistakes people make in corporate is when they're putting together a speech or presentation, they never think about the frequency of the audience. They think about, hey, this is what I know. This is what I want to talk about. Let me throw it on some slides. This looks good to me. I'm going to talk about that. If they don't understand, that's their problem. But no, that's not what communication is about. Communication is about identifying what your audience needs. What frequency are they on? What level of understanding they need. And I work with many, many technical founders who want to talk about the most complicated feature they have, but they don't understand their audience. They're just everyday people. They don't understand these technicalities. So we have to simplify it. So when you're speaking, when you're explaining a concept to someone, be on the same frequency as the audience. Where is their level of understanding? How can I meet that level of understanding and then elevate them from there? So that's the importance of frequency. Number 3 is relevance. Now, I remember I had a really tough time watching a lot of onboarding training videos when I was at work. They would have these 30-hour modules where, hey, go watch this video, go watch this training where for 30 minutes, this person is in front of the camera telling you, hey, this is how you open your tab, this is how you use this software. And it was so boring, but also a bigger question for me was, how is this relevant to me? So my job used to be as a recruiter, meaning I was calling up candidates who were applying for jobs. I would look at their resume, I would call them, and then I would pass them forward to the hiring manager. And a lot of the training that we were getting was on how do you sell new clients to work with us on our services, on our hiring and recruiting services. Now, when I was watching that, I thought, how does this apply to me? How is this relevant to what I'm doing? And we were forced to watch the training. So one day, my manager goes through all my stats and he notices that I have amongst the lowest in terms of viewership of the content. And he said, Yasser, this is not good. We have to get you to watch this content. So he got me in the call and said, Yasser, why aren't you watching it? And I said, well, it's just not relevant to me. What am I supposed to do with it? And he said, what do you mean it's not relevant to you? I said, well, I call people, I interview them, and I pass them forward. I'm never talking to external clients, selling them on our service. How is this relevant to me? And I promise you, he had never thought about that before. He had never thought about how this content was completely irrelevant to me. Right? So if it's irrelevant to me, if I'm not interested in it, then why would I listen? So you could be talking about the best subject in the most high energetic way, but if it is not relevant to your audience, what are they going to do with the information? I'll give you an example. I once attended a conference, and the conference was about how to start an online business. And this one person showed up, started talking about trading and investing and how we should buy stocks. And the entire audience is just confused and pulling out their phone. And at the end of the presentation, I went up to him and I said, hey, how did you think that went? He said, well, the crowd really wasn't into it today. I said, no, it's not that the crowd wasn't into it. It's just that it was completely irrelevant to what they were expecting. They expected this, you delivered that. They had no use case for this. So when you are talking about a subject, let's say you're talking about the environment and you're talking to some 5th graders, or if you're talking about TikTok and you're trying to explain it to CEOs and why they should use it, you have to explain the relevance. Why should you listen to this? Or is the topic relevant to it at all? Are you explaining marketing concepts to people who are in accounting? So relevance is extremely important. So you can have verbal efficiency, you can be on the same frequency as the audience, but if they don't care about the topic, they're not going to listen to you. So half the time, and I'm sure whenever you tuned out of a presentation, is because they're talking about something you just don't care about. So establish relevance. Now, lastly, repeatability. This is my personal favorite. Repeatability is, if I told you something, can you not only understand it, but also remember it enough to then repeat it to someone else with the same level of verbal efficiency and frequency as I told you? So let's say I explain to you, hey, if you want to get better at public speaking, it works like this. First, you and I will do a baseline test. After the baseline test, I'm going to do an analysis of your skill hierarchy. I'm going to give you a standard to follow in terms of which skill to work on first, which skill to work on second. And then at the end, we're going to do a 30-day analysis. That's how you get better at public speaking. Did you understand anything I said? No, most likely not, right? But what if I explain it to you like this? Hey, let's say you're learning to play the guitar. This is my fancy guitar here. Let's say you've never played guitar. I'll say, okay, learning public speaking is a lot like learning to play the guitar. First, I'm just going to teach you the basic chords, the basic skills. Then as you become good at them, and it's going to be a little boring, you're not going to feel good about them, but as you continue to make mistakes, and we identify what areas we need to work on, then we will double down on those. I'm going to give you the things that have the biggest impact first, and then we'll focus on all the small areas that help you. And after 30 days, we're going to evaluate how you did compared to day one. So you can just see the progress. Can you see how much more that makes sense than what I said before? So if someone asks you, hey, how would I learn public speaking? You can say, well, I remember Yasser said it's a lot like learning to play the guitar. At first, it's hard to pick up. You might not know what you're doing. You'll make a lot of mistakes. You'll get discouraged. But then we just learn a few chords. We get comfortable with the chords. And over time, we start to double down on the things we're doing well. And then we just measure our progress. That's how public speaking works. So you can repeat what it is that I am saying. If I say something to you and you yourself don't understand it and you can't explain it to somebody else, that means I haven't done a good enough job of communicating it to you. And with repeatability, you can also talk about the concepts of emotion and storytelling because they really sit deep in your heart. You remember them, you can visualize them, and then you can pass them forward. So you'll notice in all of these, I have some sort of an analogy, some sort of a story that I told you that creates imagery in your mind so you remember it, and then you can not only tell yourself later, but you can tell other people too. So now let's talk about what you can do instead of making all these mistakes. Now, to avoid rambling and to be more efficient with your words, you have to use a structure. My favorite structure that I use, this is my own one, it's called AAA, which is you answer the question or you talk about the topic or you make your point, and then you add details. These details could be reasons or a story, and then you answer again. So if I said, Yasser, what's the hardest part about learning public speaking? The first thing I will do is answer the question. The hardest part about learning public speaking is sticking to it. So that's my answer, okay? Sticking to it. That's the answer. You're not wondering where is he going with this, what's going on? Now I have to add details. Now I could do a reason, and then I could do a story, or I could do both. So the hardest part about learning public speaking is sticking to it. The reason I say this is because people know they have to do it. They get started, they do it for a few days, but then other things happen and they lose it. But I have noticed when someone has an actual presentation coming up that they can't avoid, they have to get on stage, all of a sudden they have a lot more urgency because now it's a real deadline. They have to get better at it, and now they'll get more motivated to continue to stick to it. So that's why you need to have urgency if you want to stick to it, and sticking to it, sticking to the practice is what is the hardest thing for people to do. At the end, I answered it again, sticking. Okay, so I answered the question, I added the details, and I answered it again. Can you see how in my mind, it showed that I've thought about this before and I can structure and organize my thoughts before throwing them out at you. If you just do this, you will sound way more intelligent. You won't sound like you're going in a million directions because it just sounds like you've talked about this before. So that's how you add verbal fluency and verbal efficiency, by just structuring your answer. Number 2, how do you establish yourself at the same frequency as the audience? You start by asking yourself, how can I explain this in the simplest form? If you are talking about the environment, you're talking about the new technology, how can you explain it in the simplest form to a 5-year-old? And then you add complexities based on your audience. So if you're explaining a new product, you have to explain it to a 5-year-old. How would they know how it works? And then you add a little bit more technicality, go up from there. What most people do is they just start at the most technical and they stay there. You don't want to do that. So start here. And one example I can give you is just give yourself 3 audiences. 5 years old, 20 years old, expert. So someone who is 5, who has no idea how the world works, someone who is 20 years old, who has some experience, and someone who is a complete expert on the topic. Explain the same thing 3 different ways and see how different it sounds. If it doesn't sound different, that means you got a lot of work to do. Number 3, make them care. If it is not relevant to them, they just won't listen, they won't apply. The best way that I have found to do this, and this also talks in point number 4, is using a story or an example. So for me, whenever I'm teaching public speaking, I know no one wants to listen. No one wants to get on stage. No one wants to practice public speaking. Is scary. So I will always tell them a story. Listen, the reason I want you to care about this is because when I was young, I hated public speaking. I used to hide in the bathroom. I did not want to do this at all. But now that I've done it and I've gotten better at it, I got better job opportunities. I've gotten about 4 million followers online. I get flown around the world to speak. This has become my entire career. I have people recognizing me in the street. All of that because I learned to speak. So I'm not saying you'll become some social media celebrity, but wherever you go, people will see that you are the best at what you do and you will stand apart from your competition. Is that something you'd want? Of course they do. Great. Now let's learn public speaking so you can get there. So I made it relevant. You know why you're learning. You know the purpose of it. You know how you can apply it. And then I will talk about that. Okay? So make them care. And then the imagery and the emotion, this is repeatability. If I asked you, tell me about the last company update you had or the last class presentation and tell me what it was about. You maybe can remember the title of it and who did the presentation, but not a lot of details outside of that. But if I asked you, tell me about a movie that you watched when you were a child, what it was about, how it made you feel, you can probably recognize imagery and emotion from that. And for me, there's a movie called Inception, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And near the climax, without spoiling the movie, there's a very intimate scene in a hospital bedroom. And I still remember the scene, I remember the dialogue, I remember the emotion, I remember the music, everything enough to repeat it to myself and then recommend the movie to other people. And I also have another show called The Penguin that I just watched. Amazing. I made a whole video about it. But it stays in my mind because of imagery and emotion. So how can you create something that using an analogy or a story or a metaphor communicates some sort of imagery or emotion so that people remember? Because if you can make them feel something emotionally, they will remember it for much longer, all right? So let's bring all of this together. Verbal efficiency. You don't want to ramble on. You want to open your mouth and people feel like there's going to be value coming out of your mouth. If you want verbal efficiency, use a structure when you speak. My structure is AAA, which is answer the question, add the details, and answer the question again to end. Number 2, speak at the same frequency of your audience. Make sure they understand it. So try to break everything down into the simplest form, explain it to a 5-year-old, a 20-year-old, and an expert, and then make sure that language is different for them. Number 3, make them care about what you're talking about. Is this subject relevant to them? If not, how can you make it relevant to them? Make sure you are bringing in storytelling and examples to illustrate that. And at the end, if you really want it to stick, you have to make sure it's repeatable, meaning they understand it, they can repeat it in their head, they can repeat it to other people, they remember it for a very long time, and you do that through analogies, stories, and metaphors. You do these and you'll become an exceptional communicator. Now, if you want more of this, there's 2 things you can do. 1, go to my newsletter, freespeakingtips.com. Every single week, I send around 3 to 4 tips. And if you want to check out my course, you can check out my courses as well. And if you want to bring me in to train your team, more information on that in the description as well. See you next time.